Joe is
Oh, okay.
sharing gallery view.
All right, there we go. Thank you. Pardon my, I've only been using Zoom for 16 months. And at any rate, welcome everyone. My name is Bill Valerio. I am the director of Woodmere Art Museum, and I am very excited to be here to be introducing my friend, T.K. Smith, who we've been working with at Woodmere on an exhibition about the artist Roland Ayers, an artist we care about a lot at Woodmere. And TK is going to be speaking tonight, offering a lecture called Entanglements with the Erotic, Roland Ayers and the Liberation of the Flesh. And I'm going to introduce TK in a minute. I want to take a moment and ask everyone to just close their eyes in reflection for a short time, because we learned today of the sad passing of the artist Jerry Pinkney, an artist who's been very much part of the family at Woodmere. We've done many projects together. We have many projects in our future that will continue on, but it's a day of heavy hearts because we've lost a member of the family. So I just wanted to recognize Jerry's passing, and I'm right now drinking Pellegrino. So, please raise whatever, you may have, either literally or abstractly, in honor of Jerry. With that, I'm very honored to introduce T.K. Smith, the guest curator of our exhibition. T.K. is a Philadelphia-based curator, writer, and cultural historian whose projects include the 2021 Atlanta Biennial Exhibition, Virtual Remains at the Atlanta Contemporary in Atlanta, Georgia. He's also the curator of Zipporah Camille Thompson, Looming Chaos at the Zuckerman Museum of Art at Kennesaw, Georgia. His writing has been published in Art in America, the Monument Lab Bulletin, that's here in Philly, and Art Papers, where he is a contributing editor. Most recently, T.K. Smith co-edited the Fall and Winter 2020 issue of Art Papers, Monumental Interventions with Sarah L. Higgins. The issue explores the intersecting concerns of art, monument, and memorial. Currently, Smith is a doctoral student at the History of American Civilization program at the University of Delaware, where he researches art, material culture, and the built environment. He received his Master of Art in American Studies and his Bachelor of Arts in English and African American Studies, with a certificate in creative writing from St. Louis University. Aside from that, TK is a wonderful person, a terrific colleague, a great person to collaborate with, a very brilliant curator. And with that, I'm happy to put myself on mute and hand it over to TK Smith. Thank you everyone for joining us. And TK, I look forward. I'm gonna sign off now.
Thank you so much, Bill. Thank you everyone for joining us, friends, family, colleagues from all over. I'll first start by thanking you, Bill, Hildy, all the folks at the Woodmere for being so gracious in facilitating this event and the exhibition. I wanna foreground this by, first I'm gonna share my screen. I wanna foreground this conversation by talking about the exhibition a little bit itself. And to let you know also that you can put any questions you may have in the Q&A at any time. We'll have a Q&A at the end. You can put any comments you have or any questions you might have about anything I said if you want me to clarify. We've set up a system to where if you're confused about something, I'll try to respond to it in real time. And just stick around with us till the end. There'll be a Q&A, and I would love to hear any of your questions, comments, or concerns. So Roland Ayers was born in Germantown in Philadelphia born in 1932. He passed in 2014. Roland Ayers' calligraphy of dreams includes 43 works and a vitrine of ephemera. The works range 30 years, that's 1959 to 1989, and it focuses on his surreal pen and ink drawings. There are also prints and watercolors and a little bit of poetry, but the main focus is the pen and ink drawings. And this exhibition actually ends in 4 days. So if you have time, if you have the capability and can make it to the Woodmere in the next 4 days, it's up until Sunday, October 24th. So, well, maybe not. There we go. Entanglements with the erotic. Why this lecture? Why now? I wanted to have a conversation, a public conversation or a digital virtual conversation that took on the overt erotic imagery in Roland's work, specifically in the pen and ink drawings, and how they come to represent a method of liberation from the limitations of flesh, the body, the physical world, your current state of being. For those who were able to read the catalog essay, and for those who are not able to read the catalog essay, I briefly mentioned the erotic in the essay toward the end, but consider this an extension of the essay, consider this the rest of it. I needed a little more time. In fact, the essay was originally called Speculations, the Art of Roland Ayers, because I was still speculating on some of the things I was investigating. So enjoy the fruits of my research labor. And let's start with a fun story about ginkgo trees. Hildy has heard this, and I've said it to a few people, but one of the things that I find really interesting about Roland is that he was obsessed with ginkgo trees. I didn't know the extent of the obsession until I was given a big old box of ephemera, where I was able to go through and read his dream journals, he drafted an autobiography, and he mentions ginkgo trees in the very first chapter, talking about how it reminds him of memories of ghosts of his childhood, how there are ginkgo trees now in the place of where he was first originally educated and things like this. And you see these beautiful forms. You see the ginkgo tree leaf kind of fans out all throughout his pen and ink drawings. You see it over and over and over again. And I recently had the privilege to take a writer's residency in Seattle. And while walking with one of the director there, she pointed out a ginkgo tree, and she was telling me all the different things in her garden that had medicinal qualities. And she pointed to the ginkgo tree and said, when the leaves turn brown, you pour hot water over the leaves and it helps with memory, which I had never known before. I didn't know what ginkgo biloba really was, right? So here I am hearing this story, and knowing that Roland had died from complications with dementia, it connected back to a philosophy that he believed in that permeates through all his work, which is everything is connected. The biological, the physiological response we have to the things around us. The director had said when we were walking, if your eye catches on something when you're walking in nature over and over and over again, that's your body instinctively telling you something. And so I want to start, this lecture by saying, I don't know if Roland knew the medicinal property of ginkgo. If he ever used it as a tea. I asked Sheila, his widow, and she said she'd never seen him brew a tea from ginkgo leaves, but they're everywhere in Philadelphia, and he saw them everywhere, and they became an essential symbol in his work. And maybe continuing that theme of speculation, his body was telling him what he needed. So what do I mean by erotic? What does the erotic even do? How did he employ this how did he express it in the work? What am I talking about? So the erotic, relating to or tending to arouse sexual desire or excitement. I always start with definitions because students love them. Liberation, the act of setting someone free from imprisonment, slavery, or oppression. Are you satisfied with that? I am not. So I had to go back a little further into philosophy. I had to discover what the erotic has come to mean as an idea or as a concept, and ended up finding out that it's not any of that. It's an energy. So going back to Plato's Symposium, which is basically a dialogue, like a performance of multiple speeches. It's fictional, but it's philosophy in that each character represents different thought. And so I'm going to take a very diminished look into it by saying all the speeches are comments on Eros, the god. All of the characters are speaking on Eros as a god, Eros, erotic as love. So Socrates, who relates what he once heard from a wise woman, according to her, Eros is a spirit, not necessarily the embodiment of a god, not necessarily a feeling, but a spirit that mediates between people and the objects of their desire. So there's an elasticity here, a connectivity here, a strand. Love is neither wise nor beautiful, but rather the desire for wisdom and beauty. So there's a desire, there's a yearning. Love expresses itself through pregnancy and reproduction. And that is the pregnancy or reproduction, physical pregnancy or reproduction through copulation, or a thought of object, of food, of action. It produces something. It's a yearning, longing strand that pulls and produces something, if you want to think about it like that. And the greatest knowledge of all, she confides in Socrates, is the knowledge of the form of beauty, which we must all strive to attain. What this kind of tells us is that we don't have beauty. You know, there's something essential in this that shows us moving from one place to another. We are moving toward, yearning toward, longing for, not necessarily having achieved what is perceivably ahead of us. And another quote I like is that Eros is neither beautiful or ugly, good or bad, but something in between the two, that oscillates between flourishing and dying, and stands between wisdom and ignorance. The pursuit of love is the pursuit of beauty and goodness. So I love that it is a pursuit. So at this point, I'm like, okay, you know, I'm moving towards something, I'm pursuing something, and that something is knowledge. And it can be beautiful or it can be ugly, it could be anything, but I'm moving toward it. The second text I really pulled out was the Kama Sutra, which, if y'all are familiar, it's Vatsyayana's, who knows when it was officially, you know, spoken or taken into or compiled, but it's an Indian Hindu Sanskrit text on sexuality, eroticism, and the emotional fulfillment of life. Now, for those of you who have read it and are very familiar with it, you know it's kind of a guide for like a young man, young aristocrat's wade through navigating society and navigating his relationships with women, be they single women, young women, his wife, other men's wives. It's kind of a guide in this. And the part that's become famous, the part about, you know, sexual positions, is only a portion of a much larger text that explores eroticism. It explores pleasure. So kama means pleasure or longing or any sensual form of enjoyment, such as music or art. Pleasure is one of the aims of life in Hindu belief, along with power and religion. So as the attainment of power, the practice of spirituality, the practice of pleasure is just as important a tenement in the lives of these folks. And so pleasure in its primary form is a direct experience of an object of the senses, which bears fruit and is permeated by the sensual pleasure of erotic arousal that results from the particular sensation of touch. And so what this kind of says is, you know, the Kama Sutra, people tend to think sex, people tend to think sexual acts, but what it really is the interplay between two bodies, a communication, a language that is being spoken to. One position means this, one action means this. There's a section in the book about biting and hitting as a form of communicating displeasure or teasing your partner. It's more than just sexual pleasure. It is the pleasure of relating to another human being. And then, of course, I have to mention, just in general, Black women. So Black women in general are a reference to understanding eroticism and pleasure. And I'm going to funnel them all through Audre Lorde and her essay / lecture, The Uses of the Erotic is Power, came out in 1978. And if you are watching this in the future and not in real time, this is when you would pause the video and go on to YouTube, where you can find her reciting this lecture in her own voice and her own cadence, which is absolutely brilliant. So you do that and then come back. For the rest of us, this essay names the process by which women have been stripped of their power and considers how women can reclaim it. And so Audre Lorde is talking specifically to women, about women and their need to reclaim erotic power against patriarchy, against oppression. I bring in Audre Lorde because The Uses of the Erotic is an amazing text. And again, I'm gonna just demolish this beautiful, beautiful lecture by giving you just sections of it. But the erotic is a measure between the beginning of our sense of self and the chaos of our strongest feelings. It is an internal sense of satisfaction to which once we have experienced it, we know we can aspire. Again, the elasticity, the string, we're moving towards something. For once we begin to feel deeply all aspects of our lives, we begin to demand from ourselves and from our lives pursuits that which we feel in accordance with that joy which we know ourselves to be capable of. Our erotic knowledge empowers us, becomes a lens through which we scrutinize all aspects of our existence, forcing ourselves to evaluate those aspects honestly in terms of their relative meaning within our lives. So I'm going to pause there and just say this essay is about how the erotic has been used to suppress and oppress women by spreading the false knowledge that the lack of pleasure, the resistance of pleasure, the suppression of pleasure, the belief that you should not get immediate gratification, the belief in modesty, all of these ways in which we have been taught in this Protestant nation to police our bodies is wrong. We are meant to feel and experience and share pleasure. Erotic pleasure is the real connection between you and another body, you and another object, looking for the beauty in that connection, that beauty that brings you pleasure. And really what she's arguing is, how can you really know yourself if you are suppressing yourself from experiencing the things that would help you to know yourself, like pleasure? And this can be applied to things that are overtly sexual, like masturbation, but it can also extend to every part of your life, like going to school. Does that bring you pleasure? Eating a fruit, does that bring you pleasure? Walking in the sun, does that bring you pleasure? And if it brings you pleasure, why are you not doing it? Why are you not outside in the sun? Why are you not eating that fruit and participating in the pleasures that this world has to offer us? And what can come from the knowing of what brings us pleasure? You know, this is a charge to women that I'm extending to all of us. This is a charge to understand yourself and develop a knowledge that is not empirical, it's sensual, it is experiential, building a knowledge of yourself from how you move and permeate through the world. It's absolutely beautiful. Please go listen to her or read it if you have The Uses of the Erotic at home or in your local library. And if they don't, please tell them to get it because it's fantastic. And this is a grave responsibility projected from within each of us to not settle for convenient, the shoddy, the conventionally expected, or the merely safe. So it's not understanding the erotic means you understand what brings you displeasure, right? You understand what hurts. This hurts me. This does not please me. This does not serve me. When you move towards what serves you, what pleases you, you are moving. It is a force, it is an energy. And leaving with this resonant quote, the erotic is not a question only of what we do, it is a question of how acutely and fully we feel in the doing, which I absolutely love. And so I don't know, you know, if Roland had the opportunity to read this text, hear her speak, if he had any kind of interaction with this train of thought, but I know that through his work, he was thinking through similar things. So what is Roland's philosophy of eroticism? This is developed through those journals, those dream journals, those artist books, that ephemera that's all in that case in the exhibition. This is what I've come up with, and the work itself, of course. Eroticism is a sensual experience of a thing outside of oneself, just as it is, suppressing any foreknowledge to be fully open to the relationship that forms between you and that object. So Roland had a statement in one of his books that said, have you ever sat and looked at a tree and released from your mind everything you've been taught about trees. Release from your mind how you know previous trees in your life have felt, to sit and be present with a singular tree in front of you. Have you ever really looked at a tree? And beyond looking, have you really felt a tree, hugged the tree, licked the tree, experienced the tree for what that tree is? Understanding that there are multiple trees in the world, but there is no other tree like the one before you. He believed that to have a real experience with something, you have to actually experience it, you know? So for him, his dreams were a method. It's a methodology, a tool for getting at the most intimate and personal parts of himself, parts of his subconscious that he couldn't readily mind just sitting at home. You know, he used his dreams as like a symbol book for understanding himself, even more so than he did in his lucid state. And for him, pleasure is the sensual process of acquiring self-knowledge. You are learning as you learn what pleases you. You are learning about you and what you are made of and what influences you. Because once you know, I really like the way this tastes, then you ask the question, well, why? And why and why and why and why? And those whys lead to answers that lead to you knowing yourself better. And liberation is the letting go of social construction and simply being a part of all that is, free from ghosts. So ghosts to Roland are memories. He uses those terms synonymously. They're memories. And in his life, in his autobiography, he describes all of the ways that people in his life, his uncle, his father, his mother, the way that they were haunted by literal ghosts. He believed in ghosts, and also their memories, things they were holding on to that were holding them back. For him, eroticism presented an opposition to ghosts. Eroticism was a freedom from memory and the entrapment of the past, always looking back when you can move forward in pleasure. And so this is how Roland would liberate himself. And because time is short, I needed to say that real early so I could get into the art later. And you'll notice in this illustration here, in one of his works, Astrological, there's a door. And inside that door, on the little bottom part, it says Roland. You'll find this symbol and symbols like it all through the work. And I'll talk about that in a second. So Roland believes in radical vulnerability, which may not seem very radical to you, but for a man in the 1960s and 70s, this radical vulnerability shaped and sculpted his artistic practice in ways that, you know, I have yet to see from a Black artist, from an artist of that time, at least not in the methods that he used. So radical vulnerability is really it. He left behind so many journals that are so vulnerable, so personal, just trying to get at who he was, why he was that way, what made him that way, so he could love that person. And, you know, it may seem to other scholars who go in and research with this ephemera, it may seem neurotic or overkill to sit and go through every dream that you have for years, every dream, every day, every feeling, and analyze it, top dog, bottom dog. You know, what did I feel when I was doing this? What was I doing when I was doing this? It may seem neurotic, but he wanted to know himself better than anybody else. And so I have a disclaimer that everything that I say from now on is speculation. And I'm going to read this note that he left us. This is from a draft of his autobiography. And also in my mind is another vision of Philadelphia's historic Germantown, a surreal vision, much like the ink drawings I have been known to create, a tree house of time experiences, leafy limbs escaping windows, memory alive, expanding like life tree water of the ancestors, the Orisha, or the many houses and worlds of Hindu gods and goddesses, a creation rooted in the thought and images branching from the now demolished brick apartment buildings that was 204 East Haynes Street, home to my parents and me for 18 years. And under that, you'll see a note that says, you will understand this vision, I know, because we all dream. And so from that, I would like to move toward how we see things erotically, right? Just as Roland asked you to look at that tree, to have an experience with that tree. And he developed a whole art teaching curriculum. He had an education, he had a degree in art education from the Philadelphia College of the Arts or the University of the Arts. He developed a whole curriculum just around this process. Look at something, experience something, spend time with something, and develop an actual relationship with it. So when you translate it to the page, when you pull that elasticity, when you try to reproduce that beauty, be fruitful in that way, you could produce something authentic, and also something authentic of you, not just a replica of what you see, but a replica of that connection. So everything is speculation. But here are a few of the things that I know for sure because he says them in his dream books or somewhere in the notes. Nudity, the human body depicted as physical or metaphysical, represents the innermost vulnerable self. There's a lot of nudity throughout this show, and that may seem salacious to some, but really it's vulnerability. He's trying to get to the meat of things. He's trying to get right to the bone of his artistic explorations. Sex and intimacy represents either pure or perverted connections between beings. So what you'll see is you'll see some sexual acts, you'll see some acts of intimacy, hand holding, bodies resting on other bodies, bodies held in the eyes of other bodies. You'll also see some things that look uncomfortable, contorted bodies, twisted bodies. His work is surreal, but in that surrealism, it comes from improvisation. He's moving through in real time, feeling imagery, thought across a piece of paper. So however he's feeling in the moment may turn the relationship between one depicted object and another. Doors and windows represent access into and outside of the mind, or different planes of existence completely. Just like I was, just like I was showing you this door, this window you'll find throughout a lot of his works, especially in the 60s. I had a really tough time trying to figure out that RA stood for Roland Ayers. I saw that in his work, there are a lot of references to musicians and artists and people in his life, people he grew up with in Germantown, his aunts, his uncles, his family. So when I see this RA, I'm thinking, oh, it must be Sun Ra. I see Miles Davis, I see Charlie Parker, it must be Sun Ra. And I look over and over again, he's always in a window. He's always peering in or peering out or coming in or coming out. And it's Roland. It's Roland looking back at us, implicating us in this space he's led us into, be it in his mind or in his psyche or in his spirit. And I think that is beautiful and significant and creepy all at the same time. This is how he implicates himself in these works. The works are about him. And everything that we see are a manifestation of something of him, something of his, some thought of his, some fear of his, some dream, some nightmare. And in handling the imagery and understanding that, I handle it delicately because that's what it is. And that vulnerability to be just as dark as you are light, I commend. And then ships and vessels represent journeys, transitions, and death. And for example, birth. It represents all of these things. And you'll see these throughout the work, these particular symbols. And I wanted to read another quote from his autobiography. When confined to the house, a favorite pastime was peering out of the large ground floor front window, a window that came close to the floor, making observations of the street outside easier. Windows were valuable, intriguing entities in that things happened through them and beyond and were enacted within those frames. Windows became a private, solitary, and reflective area of quiet play. And he goes on to say, I love people, I do, but I also love my alone time. And I feel connected to people, I do, but I feel more so connected to people and myself when I can sit and contemplate before a window. And so let that, inform how you read windows when you go to see the show, which I'm expecting all of you to do. And, if you don't have the time to see the show, please know that there is a digital catalog that is available for free on the Woodmere's website. There's also a podcast, the Diving Board podcast, where Sheila and I talk about Roland's work. There's also a playlist on Spotify where I've taken songs I've heard from the ephemera or read about in the ephemera and compiled them for you. There's so much material. So if you can't engage with the physical show this time, you don't want to wait for the next show, please check out any of these platforms that present Roland's work. So something I want to share with you that is very exciting. My art historian friends will probably really, really enjoy this. But while I was doing my research last night, so that shows you, something about me, my internal self. As I was doing research for this last night, I came across something in the ephemera. In one of the drafts of his autobiography, he talks about gender. And for those of you who study queer theory, queer history, you'll know that there's something very gender fluid happening throughout the work with the figures, with the body across time. You'll sense what he is putting down, is what I want to say. He mentions that being born and being given the title of a boy halved the whole of who he was. It had the whole of who he was. And he mentions that there are places and cultures that understand this kind of halving, how a body can contain both male and female energy. And so the Bambara peoples of Mali, today Mali, in their creation story, they have a deity named Pharaoh, who is often associated with equilibrium and eternal life, and they take on both male and female forms at different times. Known as the god of restoration and fertility, because they brought stability after his twin caused great disorder. And so why is this significant? If you spent any time with the work, you know a lot of this work is chaos being brought into order. Pharaoh brought the Nile River, laid down the Nile River, destroyed all of the growing trees that were poisoned to allow the healthy trees to grow. And in this, created on an ark, brought man to earth. Roland specifically mentions this, and he spent time in West Africa, and I kept searching and searching for some connection to West Africa besides the sculptural faces, besides dark skin, besides references like African fruit. And it's this story is the most significant of them all, that we've talked about the tondo, the round, form out of the Renaissance. We've talked about mandala and the practice of spiritual faith and meditation. But this story breaks apart the idea of linear and brings together works like the birth and death of organic cities. If you look at the work, and I'll show you some in a minute, I'm sorry I'm taking so long, but if you look at the work, you'll see cities being made and unmade, rivers being laid down. You'll see trees sprouting out of everywhere, which is the work of this one gender transcending figure. And I say all of that to say that Roland believed he held within himself both genders. And that is a word, we might put a label on that. He was a heterosexual man. No one could say he was not. But he did understand that he had feminine parts to himself, and he had a special connection to women in his life. And I say that to say, when you read the imagery, when you spend time with it and you see women, you may not be looking at a woman, you may be looking at a manifestation of Roland's internal self. So that was a fun discovery. Hope y'all have fun with it. Hope it provides another legible lens into the work, or inspires you to study creation stories in West Africa. So I would like us to take the time to look at this work erotically. I would like us to gaze erotically together. This is astrological, and it's one of my favorite works in the show, mainly because it includes a self-portrait of Roland, which is rarer when it's full. We see him in windows, we see him in doors, but this is a full self-portrait of himself inverted. To give you a detailed shot, because I know that's a lot, here's Roland's body, and you can see the confluence of visual influences. You can see energy lines moving across the body. You can see the chakra points defined. You can see that he is transparent in some places. On one arm, he is a grown man. On the other arm, he is a child. And you can see his full open face and eyes next to that open door that says Roland. Then all around him are these surreal images. This is when, if you weren't watching this in live time, I would say, pause the video and spend some time looking at this object and tell me what you see. you know, but since we're live and we got to keep going, I'm going to keep going and let you know a little bit of what I see. So part of this yearning for beauty and pleasure is the understanding that not everything is beautiful or pleasurable. Not every means to beauty is beautiful or pleasurable. Sometimes it is grotesque. Sometimes it is terrifying. And Roland, who dealt with dreams and nightmares and was very clear that these are dreams, sweet dreams and nightmares, blended that in his imagery. And so you see some things that seem grotesque, some things that may seem perverted, some things that may seem cruel or uncomfortable. I showed a friend the work and he likened it to Kara Walker's work. And I feel like that is an honest reading. I'm not going to tell any of you how to read the work, whether you see something beautiful or something grotesque in it. I want you to oscillate between those two binaries. There is beauty and there is grotesqueness in the work, because there are beauty and grotesqueness in all of us. And being able to face that with radical vulnerability is in itself beautiful. So did he achieve beauty? Is erotica working? You got to tell me. So keeping it moving, I want to provide some historical context. Ooh, time is moving. Okay, I'm gonna speed through this, y'all. I want to provide some historical context. Roland was growing up, born in 1932, was growing up in a time where music was getting more and more salacious. And this was a man who loved music. He loved the blues, he loved jazz, and it was a major part of his life. In his autobiography, he talks about him and his friends being, you know, dirty little kids and going to a corner store where they had a jukebox and playing this song, My Bicycle Tilly, which has some pretty salacious terms, you know, and some hidden imagery in there as well. Like I put on my rubber and then she's ready to go, things like that. And so songs like this, which are funny and nasty, also are honest and express a form of playful sensuality and sexuality that music was starting to facilitate. Specifically, again, Black women, blues singers were able to express their sexuality in ways that we weren't necessarily seeing being magnified in this way. You have blues songs getting as nasty as they want to, and then we have blues performers traveling the Chitlin circuit, and then we have records preserving these songs, preserving these performances for us, so that we can also participate in their expressions of pleasure, the erotic, and also their assertions that they experience pleasure and eroticism, not just that it's there, but that they, as Black women in their bodies, were experiencing pleasure. That was pretty revolutionary, and it has been well written about. There's a book that I've cited at the end where you can get into some of it. There are also songs that are directly influencing the work, like Hesitation Blues. Hesitation Blues is a pretty nasty song too. And one of the less nastier lines is, she says, "Come here, you dirty little Sal. You're trying to be a bad girl, you don't know how. How long do I have to wait? Can I get it now, or do I have to hesitate?" It's a fun song. It really is. It's kind of catchy, but it's an example of how music is playing with that yearning, hesitation, desire, longing, building a pressure in the search of beauty. So Hesitation Blues here is one of his earlier works, 1968, and you can see the style shift between Astrological, just a few years. That's 2-year difference in the style shift. And you can see him illustrating Hesitation Blues. You see the naked woman dancing, you see the faces watching, the construction of a tenement home. It's a gorgeous piece. I'm gonna keep it moving. Also, what is happening is the sexual revolution, build about 1960 to 1980, depending on which historian you ask. Also, pretty much the range of this show. The sexual revolution, big tenements of it, contraception. You know, the belief that sex doesn't have to be procreative, that fruitfulness, that production, that growth that comes from eroticism, from desire, doesn't have to be a child. Sometimes that production can be art, it can be music, as the Kama Sutra says. But he was living in a world that was confronting what sex is outside of procreation, which was, you know, mind-blowing to a lot of people who were just having sex for procreation. Or a lot of people who were having sex for procreation, but saying you shouldn't politically, outside of marriage, inside of marriage, people are always going to be having sex, but it's the belief that maybe there's something else in sex, and the understanding that there's something else in sex that isn't just procreation, it's pleasure. And what is the use of that pleasure? Who earns, who deserves that pleasure? And it became a big part of the women's movement because contraception is more control over a woman's body, of course, also gives her more choice to have sex and have fun, which is, of course, to a lot of conservative people, just not it. They don't want you to have fun. They don't want you to have a choice. They want you to be a vessel for reproduction. So the sexual revolution was a big deal. Pleasure, not procreation, sex outside of morality. The Kinsey report came out at this time in 1948. It was rediscovered, and people are seeing now that people have always been having sex for pleasure. So it's just an uproarious time where pleasure is now on the table. Pleasure is now something we're talking about everywhere, and the mini skirt and the bikini, I could go on and on. And then you have works like Pleasure Function, which I feel is a subversive piece. Pleasure Function exists in this kind of undulating, twisting round. This figure in the center, which I'll show you a close-up of, has both a male and female face, cradling with this floating female figure here on the left. Together, their hands meet at what looks like an egg. Now, I'm of two minds. I think that this is an egg, and that egg is going back into the canons of art history, representative of life and fertility and growth and procreation. But the labia-like forms around it that protect it like a hood also make me think it's a clitoris. And so I'm thinking that Roland is thinking about pleasure and its function in our lives. Who facilitates that pleasure? Where is the pleasure centered? Maybe it's in the clitoris, or maybe it's in procreation. I think he's saying kind of both. That egg is always a little more organic looking than, oval perfection. There are also things going on like European avant-garde film is happening, Blaxploitation is happening, and just in the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s, we're seeing the Black body in new and exciting ways. And Roland was a producer of that Black body in his work. Throughout his work, you can see here the figure is what looks like his toes are curling, his body is extending to another figure down below, in this beautiful way of expressing pleasure that is almost painful. I also wanted to bring in the Kama Sutra again, because obviously he had read this book. There are so many of the positions throughout his work. I found a quote where he says that he was attempting to render bodies as dancers dance, almost impossible positions, almost an inconceivable connection between bodies, right? So you have the creeper's embrace, you have climbing a tree, you have the yawning, the donkey's assault, all of these well-known Kama Sutra positions that kind of flower and pepper throughout the work, because he is commonly showing bodies together embracing. And then there is another theory I have about the composition of his work. Within the Kama tradition, which this figure here may look a little bit like who you see on Valentine's Day. Well, in India, the Kama deity has a bow and arrow and rides on a flying parrot, but is very similar in that they represent pleasure and eroticism. But there's also a plane of existence, the semi-material plane, to us subjective and invisible, where the disembodied personalities, the astral forms of ourselves, they appear until they fade out from it by the complete exhaustion of the effects of the mental impulses that created these elodience of human and animal passions and desires. All of that to say, and that was a mouthful, all of that to say is it's a state that's like orgasm. You are there until you cannot be anymore, until you cannot conceive of being on this plane anymore. And looking back at Pleasure Function, that round, weightless world, looking back at astrological, oh shoot, went too far. that open consciousness. Perhaps Roland is peeking into this world, this plane, this astral plane, where he feels pleasure so intensely that he cannot remain there. I also want to take a second to talk about birth. Okay, I'm going to wrap this up in 5 minutes. Roland went through in the 1960s a very hard rebirthing process, like a spiritual rebirthing. And it gave him a different perception of, one, the woman's body, but also what birth and the connection to his mother and what his connection to other women were. He describes in his autobiography that his birth was hard, that he had to be brought out by forceps, and that his mother was advised not to have any more children, and she did not. And so birth, rebirth, pain, procreation, and pleasure are all tied together in the practice of loving, physically and metaphysically. So I'm going to go quickly through some of these drawings. This is Erotica, a drawing where you'll see some of those Kama Sutra positions. You'll see that weightlessness. You'll also see up in that top corner, the Pan-African flag. You'll also see those labia-like ribbons. You'll see people touch. You see this woman is grabbing this man's penis. You'll see that there are multiple bodies conjoined like two hands. It's absolutely gorgeous and almost too much. One of the comments, I frequently get when I walk my friends through or I'm sitting in the gallery is, why is there no color? Who can get into these without color? And I just want to say, before we run out of time, that I hope that you add the color when you have the experience with the work, that you put some of yourself in this work and get out what you need to get out from it, because there's so much beauty and pain in all of the works. Speaking of color, Bosch's A Garden of Earthly Delights, there's a lot going on. I'm not going to get into all that, but I will say that frequent motifs that express his beliefs in eroticism as a liberation, The Garden of Earthly Delights has often been referenced to describe his style, but also just the opposite. He is critiquing the Garden of Earthly Delights through his own use of the motif of the garden, Adam and Eve as sexual beings, as finding freedom and liberation through knowledge, through the ever-feeding tree of life. And so you'll see motifs like the apple, the serpent, the tree of life. You'll see Adam and Eve forms like this one on Peaceful Island together in bliss, as opposed to what Bosch is representing, which is a cautionary tale, saying don't delve too deeply into the delight, don't submerge into it, or else you'll pay the ultimate price. And you'll see here, Untitled 1972 is actually not in the show, but you see that same feeding from the fruits, the large animals intertwining with bodies. You'll see the same kind of imagery, fruits and seeds. And you'll also see grotesque imagery. This is in the third panel that represents hell, juxtaposed here with a woman from Astrological's body who is half boat, half form. I've come to the conclusion that a lot of these boats are his mother. A lot of these boats are representing the ark that brought that God and humanity into life. They also represent ships, as we talked about, the Middle Passage. This body represents all things, and there's a magnolia sitting inside, but you can see it's formed from the city. It's formed from architecture. The rim of the boat is formed from windows and doors. And Roland believed, if nothing else, that your environment shapes who you are. And this intense search for who he was involved an intense search of the architectural structure of Germantown. And that's a whole nother conversation that I kind of get into in the podcast. So if you want to have that, get into that. He also believed in the alternative sciences. He believed in the silver string, the astral ribbon, the breaking apart of the self when you astral project. And as all those cords that tie you to your body snap, the one cord that remains is the astral ribbon, or the silver string. And you can see this image spreads out a body of consciousness across different planes of existence. That's a complicated one. There's a lot of symbolism in that I'm still looking for. There's that coated egg again. There's a sexual act intertwined and protected inside nature. There's Orgasm, 1989, which is also gorgeous and full of imagery, like that Black Power fist that I love. Memories, windows, mirrors, and faces. I don't know if I can gesture with this, but right above this woman's figure on the right is Roland's face looking out at her. It's made from nature and other illustrative forms. And then to kind of close it up, there was a point where Roland was going to sell some of his erotic drawings as cards that you could gift to your friend or your partner or your whoever else. And I think they are so beautiful. There's a set of 4, and I'm for sure that the 3 that have the label, the Space Swing Love, the Round Bed, Country Lovers, are a part of that set. I found this 4th one online. I'm not 100% sure. It's called Entangled Bodies. It's about the same dimensions, but I'm not 100% sure if that's the 4th card. And maybe Sheila would be able to, if she's here in the talk, able to illustrate that or confirm that or not. But there are 4 beautiful cards that show lovers embracing, not necessarily a sexual act either. It's an embrace between 2 bodies in these beautiful aerial, gestural, natural forms. And then Originating, which also includes that egg, is also the title of his first chapter, his childhood, in his autobiography. And this is a list of books that should also be shared in the chat. And that's it. So I really want to talk to y'all. I know I only gave us 5 minutes. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, but if I could open it up to questions, I'm gonna see if I can stop sharing my screen. All right. I can't see y'all, but you can see me, right?
Okay, TK, I'm just putting the books into the chat and then I'll give you some of the questions. Here we go. They're in the chat.
Thank you, Hildy.
I think. Yes, they should be. If not, I'll do it again. Okay, so one question from actually Andrew, part of the education staff at Woodmere. He's asking, are there any efforts to document or publish Roland's curriculum for education? If not, what do you imagine that to look like? Did he have plans to publish it or share it as a tool for teachers?
As far as I know, no, but fortunately for you and I, it is in the collection. It's in the hands of the Woodmere now. So
we can share it.
You can share it if you so choose, if you find it useful, you know. And something about a lot of Roland's work is that Roland was doing a lot of future work. He was waiting for someone like me. He had notes and dates and addresses and phone numbers and names. And, you know, I've expressed this before, but it is ridiculous to see how well documented he was. Even his handwriting, you know, was ridiculously legible. And I think he was just waiting for a scholar to come up behind him and share a lot of what he's done. So I don't think he would be opposed to it. I would definitely check with Sheila. But if you find some use for it, you know, he had an affinity for teaching children other ways of being in the world. And that speaks to that relationship that he had with trees. He wanted kids to really be here and not bog themselves down with social constructions of gender or race or sexuality. He wanted people to just be with each other.
Thank you. That's encouraging for us here. A question actually from Bill earlier. He was wondering when you were first, I think, talking about the erotic, are these quotes from Roland's writings?
Yes. When I was talking about the basic Oxford Dictionary definition of erotic, then I went into Plato, I went into the Kama Sutra, I went into Audre Lorde, and the definitions are definitions I've compiled based on what I've read in his ephemera and the readings of the work. They are my definitions technically, but they, I believe, are true to him.
Thank you. Another question from one of our wonderful docents. So if his work is about him, isn't he also using it to show us how it could be about us? If I look at people or objects he depicts, can I also be seeing how he sees and learning that I can see that way too.
Yes, that's exactly it. That is exactly it. That's all it is. It's understanding. It's teaching by example. He was an educator, and I don't think he took on any formal positions at a university or anything like that, but he did teach art. And I think that he was trying to get artists to move beyond the market and really make some real work. So I think that's exactly it.
Yeah, yeah. And one other question, how has the Woodmere's proximity to Roland Ayers' birthplace and environment, as you noted, affect your curation of the exhibition?
I came into this project later. The project was already decided it was going to happen. And I'll tell you what they told me, which is when Roland was dealing with his dementia, when he was living partly here, partly not, and institutionalized, they had a field trip and brought him to the Woodmere, and he did not want to leave. He had a relationship with the institution that is a place that always honored his work and respected his work. And I think that in knowing that, it made me want to do the best job I could to honor his work and to honor it in this space. I don't know where his work is going to go from here. I don't know if people will see the show and make sure to include him in group shows or give him another solo show. I don't know. But I know that we did the best we could with where we were at to show his work to the people in the place that he loved. So.
Thank you. That was a nice acknowledgement. One last question before Bill chimes in. Were there many pieces you could have included in the show but did not? And if no, why?
Oh, that is the hardest question. Time. Roland traveled the world. His work is everywhere. And, you talk to Sheila, you read some of his notes. He was having shows in his living room. He was giving work away. His work is I was talking to somebody and they said they have one of his pieces in their bathroom. It would take me so much time to find where all his work is. I don't know how much work he produced. There's no comprehensive list anywhere, and he would produce things and sign them, and then off they would go into the world. And who knows how much work he has in Europe. Like I can't even he's in some collections that are accessible, but also he was there just making work like he was here. Could say the same thing for West Africa. Because of the time constraints, this show pulls mostly from two local collectors, well, semi-local, on the East Coast of the United States. Two collectors who have for a long time seen value in Roland's work. And Bill might be able to speak more to that, but to finish out my answer, I wanted the pen and ink drawings, the ones that were not made for commercial work, the ones that you could tell he was making for himself and the folks around him. And so there's a uniformity to the works that are in the show that you may not see in the diversity of his work that exists out in the world.
TK, I want to chime in and say this was really wonderful and compelling and beautifully done in every way. So just, thank you very much. I do want to, I have two things that I've been thinking about as you've been speaking, and I was glad, like just now in those remarks you made, you talked about Roland's relationship to Europe, and that, that there probably, are a lot of works by him in collections in Europe. We know that the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam has a piece by Roland Ayers. Because he lived in Amsterdam and he considered Amsterdam his second home, or at least he described it, that way at one point. And when I think about Amsterdam, I think about, Philadelphia is a puritanical city compared to Amsterdam, where the pleasure function, spills out into the streets, and there's an entirely different sort of culture of the erotic. And I was wondering, my question to you is going to be like, do you feel like, there's something about, Philadelphia that's so not erotic as a city, And, this artist who adopts Amsterdam as his second city, is there anything is there anything there that for you kind of resonates through the work? I mean, I've looked for references to Amsterdam specifically, and I haven't found them. But maybe I don't need to see, images of, a specific place, but maybe it's kind of there. I mean, what do you think about that?
Absolutely. So, in one of those journals in the vitrine, one is from his travels in Amsterdam, and he's scribbling doorways, windows, just like he did in Philadelphia. And so some of these doorways and doors may be him looking at us from Amsterdam. Some may be, him peering at us from Philadelphia. I definitely know, and I'm sure too, he had an explosive experience in Europe as a Black man serving in Germany, then as a Black man traveling freely, but not just as a Black man, as a Black artist. And the freedom that he experienced in Europe, falling in love with avant-garde performance and avant-garde film, and seeing, other artists playing with the erotic in ways that you might not have seen here in the 50s and 60s, 70s. I think it had an explosive impact on him to tell his truth. And that's why I think we don't see necessarily a lot of references to Africa and Europe, because he was always taking those lessons and turning them into, how can I better understand where I come from and who I am? His autobiography starts with a description, and I had it, but it's a long quote, so I didn't include it. But he talks about the place in which his childhood home had existed, a tree growing from that place and branching out into whatever his life would be, and so it's the root of Philadelphia is inseparable from the root of whoever he is. The freedom to speak it, I think, and the acknowledgement that there is value there, I think was validated in his time in Europe.
That's so interesting. Another question I wanted to ask you, I mean, I don't care if we go a little longer, if you don't care, TK. You mentioned somebody bringing up Kara Walker in relation to Roland's work, and I was wondering if you would comment on how and where you would place Roland's work in the stream of American art history. I mean, what are the resonances that you might share?
Well, so Roland was trained, so I can give you an art historical answer, and then I'll give you a cultural historical answer. He was definitely a child of the artists who trained him. Those biblical motif references, specifically the Tower of Babel, the Ark, those are things you see from the folks that trained him at the Philadelphia College of Art, that you see especially not as surreal in his earlier work. He starts to break those down.
You're referring to like Jacob Landau and
yes,
and yeah, exactly. I agree with that.
He also loved Chagall, and if you look at Chagall's work, the floating forms connecting to each other, floating toward each other, dreamlike states. There's also a lot of that. Bosch, of course. There's some Escher. Like, you'll see lots of different art historical references. As a cultural historian, I would say he fits right into jazz. Like, this work is improvised drawing on paper. It's jazz on paper. It is jazz, and the freedom of expression that came for musicians with jazz, and for the mobility that came for it with Black people. I think that's what you're seeing on paper, and I think that's what he's expressing through images and the free flowingness of his own mind and creativity. So I'd put him in the legions with jazz artists, and his well-respected peer Charles White, also made beautiful drawings and played with the figure in ways that aren't necessarily as surreal, but get a little closer to the fantastical that Roland really dove into, So that's how I'd answer that.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. That's wonderful. Hildy, have we answered questions that have all been, are we?
We have. I just want to tell TK how many thanks there are in the chat room. And One particular comment, I appreciated this lecture so much, especially the invitation to be fully present in the moment and your revelation of Roland's thoughts about being sundered in half when we are gendered.
That hit me kind of hard too, honestly. One of the marvelous things about this work is that I got this dream journal to go along with it. You know, like this is like an art historian's dream, right? And I'm not an art historian. So any art historians who want to dream along with Roland Ayers, you need to come on and see this ephemeral material at the Woodmere. But he was explaining himself and playing with his own, the images that would come from his own mind. And he was saying, you know, oh, you know, I'm attracted to this kind of woman. And in some of his dreams, he would be that woman. You know, he would say, you know, I miss my mother. And in some of his dreams, he would be his mother. You know, he had a little white girl that would reoccur in his dreams that represented a kind of fear that he embedded in, that was embedded in himself, that was always somehow protected. And the layers of that kind of like psychological work, they need psychological and layered analysis, but it's all there. He was all of it. He's the horse, he's the tree, he's the sun, he's the angel, all of them are expressions of him. And I think that in the ways that we construct our realities, if you follow pleasure as a methodology, follow that elastic, that pull towards pleasure, you might find yourself part of everything too. Everything is all is everything. There's God in everything, some people say, you know. And so I think Roland was kind of riding on that train.
TK, I want to say thank you one more time, and that I'm very taken by the remark you made that Roland was so methodical in his writing, in his documentation of his career. His archive, you know, was given to Woodmere. Thank you so much, Sheila, with such incredible trust, but it was already organized in so many beautiful ways. And your notion that he foresaw that some future scholar would, you know, pick this up and be able to, you know, tell his story. You know, I do have to point out that I think you are that scholar and have done such a beautiful job, you know, already in opening it up for all of us. And, you know, I do sincerely hope that Roland's work continues to resonate, that there are more shows, that other museums express an interest. You know, we at Woodmere are, you know, never more thrilled than when works of art are requested, you know, on loan for exhibitions at other museums. And, you know, I hope that all of your beautiful work, you know, and thank you, TK, in working on this exhibition, results in extraordinary new recognition for Roland. And that I hope that you will continue on these explorations, because it's very deep and really wonderful. And I think what you've done is take this body of work and, you know, make it resonate for all of us here tonight. So I just want to say thank you again, TK, for not only tonight, but everything, you know, associated with this exhibition, you know, the curatorial work, the podcasts, the love and enthusiasm. So, you know, with that, I want to say thank you again. And thank you to everybody who's joining us tonight on Zoom. And as TK said, I hope everyone comes to see the exhibition. Hildy, I am kind of scratching my head, and, you know, I guess my head is in sort of a different place tonight. But does the show close on Sunday, or is there?
Yes, it does. It
It
closes.
does. Okay.
This was
All
supposed
right.
to be our closing reception.
Got it. Well, so everybody should please make it to Woodmere before Sunday. And, you know, with that, I hope to see you in the galleries. And thank you again.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you so much.